co-chairs and for kicking us off today. Just a note, for those who are not members of the Advisory Council, welcome. We're glad you're here. There will be a public comment period at the end of today's meeting. The goal is around 12:10. So we just ask that you wait until then to provide comment, but there will be an opportunity for that. And so before we really dive into the first main agenda item, we're hoping to do a roll call of committee member or of council members, and then also our ex officio council members. And I believe, Kristen, is there a slide with the membership?
No, we're actually going to have to skip roll call today, Ben, just because we have such a packed agenda, but Tara and I are taking notes of who's in attendance.
Wonderful. Okay, we're taking notes. We'll welcome everybody again. And so what we'll do is we'll just dive right in, and we will, I will turn it over to Kristen to give a little bit of a previous meeting recap before going into the Minnesota CAV guiding policy principles, where there's a presentation as well as an action item from the committee members we'll be asking you for.
Thank you, Ben and everyone. And we also wanted to welcome, we have a new participant today. Senator Carlson and his staff may be joining us from the Senate Transportation Committee here in the Minnesota Senate. He is going to be our new appointee on behalf of the Senate DFL to join us in this work. So if he's not here, we will make sure to welcome him when he joins. For those that did not have the opportunity or were too busy to attend the April meeting, we just wanted to provide a recap as it does inform our conversation in our first major agenda item. We heard from several key stakeholders that will help inform our conversation today, including the Auto Alliance, which is the global auto manufacturers, Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, leadership from the USDOT, and our Department of Employment and Economic Development. And as you see on the slide, there are a few key takeaways we want you to take away from those conversations. The Alliance has their own policy recommendations that they are making to states and the federal government. There's many recommendations, but they focused on wanting states to harmonize their laws and focus on infrastructure investment like lane markings and signage. Partners for Automated Vehicle Education is doing a lot of engagement on behalf of the auto industry with communities. So they're asking us to work with them to focus on how we message this work, convene public events, and they're also working on an AV engagement toolkit that Minnesota is watching closely and see how we can use. ITS America continues to remind us that connected vehicle technologies are very important, that we need to continue to invest in them and communications infrastructure, as well as bike and ped infrastructure with some of the unfortunate fatalities and traffic trends we've seen over COVID. They also reminded us that equity needs to be a continued focus of our program. The USDOT leadership out of the Secretary's office talked about their key goals and priorities for the administration, including future-proofing our transportation system, which should focus on AV transit, electric vehicle programs, which as we know is another council here at the DOT, making sure we continue that focus on bike and ped investments, as well as continue our longstanding traditions in ITS investments and CAV research. They also reminded us that freight needs to continue to be a key focus for our council and work. And lastly, Dee reminded us that April was Tech Careers Month, and so the council wrote a blog post. So some key takeaways very briefly before we dive into the guiding principles this is what they shared. Public engagement is critical, and they reminded us that it needs to be meaningful public engagement where we listen to community members, that we are asking policymakers how we need to support their communities to help their own constituents prepare for an automated future. We heard that communities really want cab pilots, whether that's the L2 that Phil mentioned or some of the higher levels of automation like the MedCity Mover. This is going to be an increased heightened demand. The DOT wants feedback from organizations like you all and states like Minnesota to help guide them in what data, information, and resources we as a state need to continue this work. They also are asking us to continue looking for policy barriers. So we need to understand what in our laws is preventing deployment and make sure that the state laws address human drivers as well as the operations of AVs. They want us to continue to see how we can regionally harmonize traffic laws. So with our MaSTO work, this is something we're working on with the 9 other states in the Midwest. They also want to see how we can coordinate with congressional members. And this is something Tara's looking at with the launch of the MedCity Mover. And last and least, they want to continue to support you all with your leadership and engagement as Minnesota is now a leading state in this work. So with that, Ben, I think I'll stop. And I'm not sure if we need to pause for questions, but I'm happy to if there were any.
Are there any questions at this time? Okay, hearing none, Kristen, please go ahead.
So we're going to hand it to Jay to introduce the discussion on the CAB guiding policy principles.
Good morning. Great to be back today. For those that don't know me, my name is Jay Hippis, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Operations. One thing we've been talking about at the ICAB team is the guiding principles that we're looking at as state organizations, but also how we could actually roll this out across the whole entire state. So a little bit of background for those who are maybe new to the group. So ICAB was actually the first group that kind of formally formed around CAB in Minnesota before the Advisory Council. So it's primarily state agencies, University of Minnesota, Met Council, and the FHWA. And this group has a couple different roles. One role is to support the Advisory Council on helping you with recommendations and then actually implementing those recommendations. But we also look at collaboration along state agencies on where are we going to make sure we're all on the same page. So as we've been talking about that piece about where are we going, we thought we'd develop some guiding principles on just how we want to conduct our business as those state agencies. So as we developed these, we thought these were a great concept that we should bring to the Advisory Council, that we would like the Advisory Council to adopt similar or the proposed guiding principles, but also for the Advisory Council to make the formal recommendations to the governor that others working in this space follow similar guiding principles. Because if we're not all on the same page as the state and what's important for us for CAB, we could have different competing interests, which is going to cause confusion not only to our public, but to industry and others that really want to see CAB make a difference in terms of making Minnesota better. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen and the ICAB team. So we have several members of ICAB here to walk through those guiding principles. But say the goal at the end is we really like this group to adopt these principles as your working platform, and also include in your final report and recommendations to the governors that the governor that others also include these items too. So Kristen, I'll turn it back to you and the ICAB team who's going to walk through these principles.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you to ICAB for their leadership. They reminded us, as we talked a little bit more about the background, about the need for these principles. As Jay noted, there's a lot of work going on in this space, but there's still maybe some confusion on how we should lead across the state, across the region. And as new policymakers and leaders are talking about and asking questions about what we can do, further guidance is needed. And so while we have, your annual reports and executive reports and the annual report that CABX does each year, further guidance is needed in how we invest. And so one item was clear is that we need one document that summarizes your viewpoints and ICAB's views on how we can do this work together. And this was further reemphasized as we learned in April that a lot of the federal government and other coalitions are documenting their own principles. And so we felt it's very important for Minnesota to do the same, especially as with the new Biden administration, there's many, many more opportunities for grants. And there's the Invest and other reauthorization acts that are contemplating how we invest in and plan for connected and automated vehicles. Just some reminders as we how we compiled this. So we reviewed all of the other regional and national work and compiled that into a white paper. And we used an equity lens framework to make sure we were reaching our goals on safety, equity, and sustainability, to make sure that we include the council's vision and all of the meeting summaries over the last few years of you all convening as a council. We then took that work and worked with key individual stakeholders. So we met with cities, counties, MPOs, and asked, what is in these principles as a draft that needs to be further honed before we can present it in full to the council? And then ICAB approved this work after a really robust discussion after the last two meetings, and I really want to attribute that. And with that, they were prepared to present these to the council. So before we fully go into a conversation, I would welcome any individual members from ICAB if they wanted to share any of their thoughts or ideas or feedback as we're presenting these to the council. I do see a few ICAB members, including Brian and Wendell and Gina. Would any of you like to speak to this topic about how these were developed?
Wendell, go ahead.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I just wanted to give and interject kind of how the guiding principles align with some of the work that Federal Highway has been doing in automation, and of course the change in the administration and some of the priorities that the Biden administration has put forth within USDOT. Typically, Federal Highway Administration's activities center around outreach, policy and guidance, and research. And one of the things that we hope is that we want to ensure that technology advances public policy. And so I think, you know, the Minnesota modeling, or Minnesota is modeling this approach around these CAV guiding principles. We see it in a number of the bullets in the principles that are laid out there. And they align very well with some of the things that the current administration is looking at in terms of safety and equity, climate change and job creation. There's a piece there in the innovation that speaks to kind of the public-private work that's going on and some of the things and the partnerships that Minnesota has done in the past. I mean, if you go all the way back to GuideStar with ITS to where we are today with connected and autonomous vehicles and some of the pilots that Minnesota is planning to roll out this year. I think that shows Minnesota is a leader. It's one that you know, I think we see nationally. Kristen and her shop has been very focused in providing leadership both within kind of the Mid-America states as well as a national role in terms of kind of developing roadway concept of operations that kind of connect vehicles and the roadway and how we use technology in the future. So I see it, I guess, from my division office perspective here, but we also see it nationally. And I think the principles, again, not to take away from investing in kind of the existing infrastructure. We don't want to necessarily leave kind of the pavement markings and traffic control signals and those things behind, but I think at the same time to advance forward, these principles can do that for Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell, for that FHWA perspective on it. Are there any other ICAV members who would like to speak to this as well?
Nancy, this is Gina, and I think we're going to go into a little bit more detail coming up, but just to say a couple of words about the process. It was very kind of grassroots and ground up, and I think that we've spent several meetings talking about the principles and identifying where we still had questions. So a lot of refinement and discussion did go into these. But again, because it was so interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary in the discussions, it was really an opportunity to take that kind of high-level macro look at what we should be doing as a state. So I think that there was great benefit in the conversations that we had around the principles. And I'll save my comments for my specific principle I'm supposed to talk about coming up.
Thank you, Gina, for speaking to the process too, and appreciate your engagement in it. All right, I'll just pause to see if anyone else wants to chime in on the development of these guiding principles before we go back to Jay. Great. I think I'm seeing anything. So actually, I'm just going to pause here, though, for a moment. I believe Senator Jim Carlson joined us, our newest member to the Governor's Council on Connected and Automated Vehicles. Welcome, Senator Carlson. Thank you for joining us. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Jay, to continue on your presentation. Or back to you, Kristen. I'm sorry, did you want to say more about it before. Back to Kristen. Sorry, sorry about that.
She'll walk through the individual pieces, and there are certain ICAP members that are here that are going to go a little bit more in depth.
Very good.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy and Wendell and Gina. As they noted, ICAP was really involved in the development of these, and we tried to incorporate in as many comments as we could, so long as they were not conflicting from one another. And so what we're going to do is you see a list here of the 9 principles. They were emailed out on July 1st. And what we're going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint and open up the Word document. But I would encourage you as council members, if you like, you can open it up on your own screen. And what we're going to do is slowly go through each of the 9 principles, because some of our key ICAP and other stakeholders here may have additional ideas or commentary as to make sure the council is aware of how we develop these or what's important to our stakeholders across the state. So give me just one moment as I close out this page, and you can see my lack of skills or adeptness at how fast I can share another document in 3, 2, 1. You should see a Word document that is the Minnesota CAV guiding principles, and I'm going to zoom in. Now, again, there's a lot of language here, but we were hoping that council members had an opportunity to review. We did hear from individual council members, those who could not make it, that shared their comments and ideas, and we tried to incorporate them. So I think Ben and Nancy, what we're going to do is just briefly kind of overview each principle and then pause for any additional ideas or questions, if that's all right.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kristen.
So one of the reasons we are transportation professionals is safety. And so like AASHTO and the other national coalitions, we believe that connected and automated vehicles will advance safety if done in a collaborative manner. So what we tried to do here is align this principle around safety on a few things that MnDOT and the state does already with our Toward Zero Death program, our Complete Streets program that takes a holistic approach to safety, as well as our Safe Routes to Schools and highway safety plans, to make sure that we're thinking about this as far as a systems approach to highway and other road and transportation safety. And we're also asking key questions about, can the technology even detect other users to make sure that the technology in and of itself is safe? So I will pause here and see if there are any questions, comments, or ideas. And Ben, I'll just need your help to see if there's anything in the chat box or hands raised.
I can do that. Yeah, at this time, either members, please either turn off your or unmute your mic and speak up, or you could raise the hand feature and I can call on you. Or type in the chat box. All right, Wendell.
Yeah, just to briefly mention, for us, this is really no discussion, because safety's always been our North Star within US DOT and Federal Highway Administration. So, you know, fully support this initiative. I think one thing, and maybe Kristen will note, that there is no priority here in terms of the numerical ranking. You might say it's not ranked. So just to let folks know, but safety's always been front and center for us.
Thank you, Wendell. And Wendell, as an ICAM member, reminds us, I failed to mention, these are more of a holistic approach as far as these 9 principles. We view them as kind of a sphere that it takes the whole pie to get to successful CAV deployment. And so even though these are numbered, that's for the sake of conversation and just documenting them. But we really view them as kind of this holistic circle of all the principles that are necessary to do this work. Thank you, Wendell, for that reminder. Ben, shall I move on, or are there other comments?
I think we have another one. Yep, Brian.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As the agency with the State Patrol, clearly we've been involved with ICAP since the beginning, and it's been exciting to think about how the connected and autonomous vehicles can improve traffic safety. That is our core underlying function of the State Patrol, is traffic safety, and it's exciting to see how this new technology can reduce injuries and deaths on our roadways. All along, our focus has been wanting to make sure that it is done safely, where the technology works with our current infrastructure and future infrastructure, as well as making sure it's implemented and tested properly in accordance with federal and state laws. So we're pleased that this is part of the guiding principles, and certainly encourage the advisory group to include it as well. So thank you.
Right, thank you so much. And I think that's everybody at this time.
So the next principle is advancing transportation equity. As Minnesota was the heart of the racial justice movement over the last year, this has been a very focused conversation for our statewide leaders in cab and transportation. And so we felt this was very important to heighten this conversation here in our cab work. And we will talk about this more actually with Philip Schaffner in the next agenda item. So this really focuses on how we meaningfully engage communities to understand how cab can be used to eliminate transportation barriers. This is to help us make sure that as we make transportation investments and do cab deployments, we're not displacing communities or further exacerbating any barriers. This includes things like multimodal access to transportation, making sure that we're looking at how Black, Indigenous, and people of color in other communities are involved in the decision-making process. And Philip Schaffner will talk a little bit more about transportation equity and what that looks like and how we define it now. So these are some key questions that we ask. This is out of our equity lens that we've been using for about a year now, that many of the Innovation Alliance committees have also been integrating into their work. So Ben, I think I will stop there and see if there's any comments or questions.
Thanks, Kristen. Again, feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Wendell.
Yeah, just a quick one on this. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Equity is one of the key themes that the current administration has been looking at, along with safety and climate change and job creation. So for us, it aligns quite well. I think in terms of providing multimodal choice and access to that multimodal choice is something that we've always looked for in the transportation system that we put out there. So appreciate that piece of it, I guess, from my standpoint.
Any others at this time? Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, especially from the local government perspective, having this equity as a part of looking at all the policies is something that I know statewide that we are looking at as well too. So just wanted to say that from our perspective, it is very important to have a part of everything.
Okay, I'm not seeing any at this time, Kristen.
The next principle is one that is very much aligned with our Sustainability Transportation Advisory Council. Of course, many, if not most, of the platforms of automation are being developed on electric vehicle technologies. So we feel it's critical to link our cab and EV and sustainability goals together. So here we're referencing the enterprise systems sustainability goals that are led by our Department of Administration and Commissioner Robert Davis, as well as MnDOT's own sustainability report. And so this is making sure that we can find ways to advance electric vehicle charging stations, zero emission strategies, and generally find ways that we can support resiliency and avoid the impacts of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. Ben, I'll pause there and see if there are questions.
Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat and I'll make sure to call on you. I'm not seeing any at this time, Kristen.
Yeah, Kristen, Kristen, this is Brett. I punched the raise hand, but it must not have worked for me.
Oh, okay,
So,
yes. Go ahead, please.
sorry about
Brett.
that, Ben. So I was just going to ask on this. Obviously, you know, one of the challenges with putting together guiding principles is that we can get outside of what we're focused on doing too, and obviously sustainability is very important, and every business that is out there. I'm just wondering if, as I look at all of these principles, I guess the thing that I want to make sure that we don't do is that we don't have things in here that maybe there are groups out there that can point to and say, you're not following your principles in order to drive the process that you want to get done, and then it knocks us off of our direction. And this is one that that I think, you know, could be in that area, because there are a lot of groups that that maybe believe what we believe or don't believe, or come up with other concerns. So with connected and automated vehicles. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's fine, and I support the sustainability program. I just don't know if it's a guiding principle for what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So just a question, I guess.
And I don't know if I have much of a response. I think this is a good idea to open up to the larger council and your colleagues, Brett. I will share that in our research and our work at the national level, the AASHTO coalition, which is the 52 states and territories that are departments of transportation like Minnesota, this is one of their top principles. They feel that it is important to note the intersectionality between EV and CAV, because if you omit them and separate them, it can be very hard to align the work together. In addition, one thing we talked about at AASHTO, and with states like California and Michigan that use a similar principle, they noted that because the EV industry is so closely linked to the AV industry, we are working with a lot of the same stakeholders and industry partners. And so it's important for us to try and remember that as to Brett notes, there is another statewide council leading this work, but we're trying to show our cross collaboration between the two. But Brad, happy to make changes based on what you and the council prefer.
I don't know that I have any changes that I would say. I was just thinking about that a little bit, that it's, you know, in our current environment with there's a lot of groups that are looking at different things, and our task is to try to figure out this piece of it. So I'm fine with the linkage. I don't have a problem with it. I just would be a little bit concerned that we don't want people knocking us off what we're actually trying to accomplish.
Thanks, Brett. Are there any other council members who have thoughts on that at this time? Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to acknowledge, Brett, thank you for bringing that up. And that's very important, actually, with all of these, is that having these in place, we don't get too far afield from what our main course of action is here as a council. And that is something we're going to need to keep in mind with all of these, and you know, strike that right balance in each of these areas, that we don't get knocked off course going down a path that might take us away from doing other things. So I really appreciate you bringing it up. And I truly believe, like Kristen said, we need to capture this, because connected and automated vehicles are very cross-cutting with electric vehicles, and needing to acknowledge that in what guides us. However, it's a very important point you brought up, that despite that, we can't get too far off course of what we're trying to achieve here with our council and our where we're going with it. So I just want to thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Nancy. Okay, with that, I think, Kristen, we can move forward. But if council members do want to circle back to anything that you wanted to bring up that maybe you didn't earlier, we can make sure to do that throughout as well.
Thank you, everyone. The next guiding principle is prioritizing shared mobility and accessibility. This is for a variety of reasons. One is shared mobility is a wonderful opportunity to integrate the modes that might be connected and automated in the future. In addition, much of the industry is looking at opportunities to share these resources with shared automated technology, which is displayed in examples like the MedCity Mover that Tara is leading down in Rochester. So this is really trying to remind us that this has to be a conversation broader than simply passenger vehicle automation, which is a lot of what the media talks about. But we're trying to figure out strategies on how we can use all of these different modal choices to promote both shared mobility and the broader idea of accessibility, which is how can people of all different abilities be a part of this work. I was asked by our council member, Myrna Peterson, who could not be here today because she's actually working on a shared mobility AV concept up in her hometown. She said that this is a very, very important principle for her. And so she wants the council to continue to remind themselves about the importance of mobility and accessibility for all communities, rural, urban, and suburban.
Gina.
Yes, I just wanted to add that so CTS and me, I am also involved with the Shared Mobility Collaborative, which is right now it's a Twin Cities focused organization, but we're actually in conversations about expanding our reach statewide. And I think one of the important aspects or principles of this is part of what we want to ensure is that there are options for people, that they're not limited by the types of options that they have available to them for their transportation. So, this is that integration between shared and automated is really an important aspect of this. And again, we are the Shared Mobility Collaborative is looking at how we can leverage and engage more closely with CAV and the work that's being done around CAV as well because of that connection and integration.
Thanks for bringing that up, Gina. Other council members have something to contribute here?
Hi, this is Danielle from City of Minneapolis. On the same note that Gina was just mentioning, I just got off a call with the Met Council is leading a regional mobility hub study right now. And that's kind of that concept that we're developing statewide to fix these kind of intermodal interoperability pieces. So I don't know if it's worth mentioning mobility hubs.
And I would just add to that, Danielle, that's an excellent point. With the AASHTO guiding principles that are kind of reflected in here, they actually do directly reference mobility hubs. So perhaps I'm hearing an action item to find a way to insert that here. I think we could easily add that as a reference.
And Gina, I see your hand raised again.
No, I just forgot to lower it.
Oh, it's okay. That's understandable. All right. I think after Kristen adds this, we can move to the next item.
The next principle is innovation. That almost goes without saying in a space like emerging technologies. But we in Minnesota are very lucky with your leadership that we're able to take strategic, calculated and mitigated risks to be innovative, nimble, flexible. And so this is an opportunity to remind us to continue to identify gaps in national, regional, and state research, that we need to continue to grow and invest in this space with partners that are on the call, including ICAV and council members. And we need to share information about what we're learning through our projects. And VSI is a great example of that with their innovations and cross-country road trips. So this is a reminder to continue to support advancing some of those public-private partnerships like the CAV Challenge, and making sure we even expand those partnerships to include community members. So this is reminding us that we need to think about how our procurement, our projects, our contracts, and our investments need to continue to be flexible and nimble, because as we've seen in our projects, and as many of you know, some of these technologies change as quickly as every 6 months, which does mean that sometimes our investments sunset faster than a more traditional transportation investment. So I think I'll stop there, Ben, and see if there's any other ideas.
Yes, Gina.
Okay, so I was asked to talk a little bit about this particular topic from the ICAV perspective. And, you know, when we're open to possibilities, that's really when we foster that environment for innovation. And that's, you know, that's part of the mission of the Center for Transportation Studies and of the university. Innovation actually happens to be in our particular mission statement. And, you know, we were really pleased to see that this principle was included and wanted to see it included in part because researchers have a lot of ideas. So they have a lot of things they're interested in and that they want to research. And they also want to know, what do our public sector partners, what do MnDOT and local agencies, what questions do they have? What do they need to understand more about? And who can we partner with? Who on the private sector has similar interests? So we see this as an opportunity to, again, foster those partnerships, build, build these collaborative opportunities. And, you know, as was mentioned earlier, you know, let's bring some of those big federal grant opportunities to Minnesota. We were several of us on this call, including Kristen and others. We're participating this week in the Automated Road Transportation Symposium, which is a event of about, I think, 800 to 900 people, sponsored by the Transportation Research Board. And it's a great opportunity to learn about what's happening nationwide. And as I, you know, just in a couple of the sessions, one was on rural access and, you know, the possibilities as it relates to CAV, as well as freight and delivery. And to me, those are two topic areas that are ripe for potential demonstration and investigation and deployment in Minnesota, given our environment, but also given the leadership that we have among, you know, some of the Fortune 500 companies and private companies that are based here. And we need to figure out how to make those partnerships to, you know, to the other thing I think that we heard is it's easier to go to the warm weather climate states and demonstrate these deployments. We did hear from somebody who is actually doing some demonstration in Canada. So it's like, okay, just come on down south of the border, and we are happy to work with you on these issues. So to that end, I just want to also add that the university has created the MnCAV ecosystem, which is our CAV program at the university, and I'm serving as the program director for that. And we want that to kind of be that starting point. So if public sector, private sector, other interests want to partner and engage with the university, you know, start with us, and we can help be that matchmaker for those other opportunities. So just again, really highlighting the importance of stating that fact, and that one particular sentence: create opportunities for Minnesota to lead. How do we show national leadership on some of these topics and interest areas?
Thanks, Gina. Are there thoughts from council members? Yes, okay, we have Wendell and then Phil. So go ahead, Wendell.
Just real quick, I think Gina said quite a bit there that we would definitely support. Innovation has always been paramount for Federal Highway Administration through our Everyday Counts initiatives. It's been placed in statute in terms of its language, but it's really about the public-private partnerships that are developed, the research behind it, and really to showcase the public what the technology can do. So we would strongly stand behind this.
And Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, also to just further echo what Gina has been saying, we too at BSI can help be a bridge to the industry. We work with a lot of OEMs and suppliers globally, and we see some really interesting technologies, some of which we think would appeal to Minnesota. And you know, I think we can certainly contribute to this, this goal as well by, you know, serving as a bridge to some of the technology providers, but also, you know, we have the assets and we have the technologies on board our vehicles. So now working with Gina and her group to help extend some of this knowledge to the university. So we're building a bigger and a better team here locally to help support this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Any others? Okay, with that, we can move on to the next principle.
So we heard from stakeholders that agile transportation investment should also be a key principle, particularly since it's a challenge to invest in current infrastructure, as well as planning for an emerging and changing future. So this reminds us that we need to continue to plan both in the mid, short, and long term for the investments and the programs to also allow us to integrate connected and automated vehicle technologies into our infrastructure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next agenda item with Philip Schaffner in our planning. But this also reminds us that there's an opportunity to leverage the private industry's investment and partnerships to fund or partner on some of these investments. So great examples of that are found in different states across the country that are developing public-private partnerships to do this work. So this is reminding us that we need to continue to invest in CAV research and development, and we need to be as nimble and flexible as we can so that when we're making these CAV investments, they're up to date with modern technologies, but also strategic so that we're honoring the need to oversee our taxpayer expectations responsibly. I'll pause there, Ben, and see if there's any questions.
I think I see Phil's hand raised. Oh, was that from earlier? Okay. Any others? Okay, I'm not hearing or seeing any at this time, but oh, Wendell, please go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick again here. This is kind of the unknown risk, right? What do you actually do versus what's it going to look like in 50 years? So you can't stand behind it, but you can't get too far ahead. So it's really a balance in terms of where you want to go and the policy directions that are made at a state level. So we see this in terms of balancing regulations with actually not stymieing innovation. So it's, I think that's the piece I wanted to say in terms of, you know, an agile transportation investment is kind of like, okay, we're going to do it, but we're not really sure. So there is some risk there, but appreciate that principle.
And for those that are interested in this, to Wendell and Phil's points, there's going to be a really fun conversation led by Philip Schaffner, our Director of Statewide Planning, shortly that's going to talk a little bit more about this. Really exciting work going on with his team. Ben, are there any other comments or would you like me to move on?
I think we can move on.
So as a lawyer, this one is special to my heart, everyone. Policy is really important just as much as investment and engaging communities and research. And so this one reminds us that as we continue to think about statewide or local policy, it needs to be people focused so that we're centering these laws and guidance to promote the quality of life of Minnesotans and not necessarily just the needs of industry and technology. So this is reminding us we need to continue to collaborate with key stakeholders like the council, ICAV, communities to understand how we need to update state laws and rules to address safe testing and deployment for CAV. This is really important to understand how we inform Minnesotans so that they can be informed in the decision-making process. It's also a reminder to us that there is a strong need that industry continues to remind CAVX and even our partners at DEED, that Minnesota needs to make it clear what is open and available to be doing in the state on our public roads. And industry is excited to come test here, but they're a little hesitant because we haven't really enacted a lot of policy in the CAV space outside our truck platooning bill, which Senator Carlson, who joined us today, was actually instrumental in helping pass. So I'll pause there and be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or thoughts? All right, I think we can move to the next principle.
So in conversation across the state, including our MPOs, this next principle on advancing economic prosperity and quality of life was key. Our folks that are key and local to our communities reminded us that CAV technology has the ability to connect community members and Minnesotans to different jobs, educational opportunities, to safer spaces, to their families, and even to events that grow quality of life and happiness. And I loved that language because that helped us frame this principle for us to discuss today. So this reminds us that transportation connects us, but it can also create barriers when we're not thinking about it holistically. So some of the policy principle here are reminding us that as we talk about automation, there are conversations that need to be had about workforce development, upskilling and reskilling the workforce of today as we think about automation in the future. And our labor stakeholders continue to remind us that we need to be engaged in those conversations to promote CAV workforce development so that no individual driver or community member is left behind. This also came out of conversations on promoting equity through small business development. So as we're working with other stakeholders, there are many different CAV businesses that can be mentored with some of the lessons that we're all learning as leaders on CAV. This also means we have an opportunity to train all of us and our staff and new professionals on CAV and ITS skills. Phil's team at VSI Labs is an excellent example of that, as is the University of Minnesota and MnSCU, to help us remind us what are the upcoming trends on CAV and how can we engage young people through CAV camps and other STEM resources, as well as training young professionals to enter this field to support the council and work in the future.
Thoughts or comments on this principle? Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, number 8 is so important. I would love to participate in this. You know, having worked in this field for the past 7 years, there is just so many opportunities on the technology side, on the policy side, on the maintenance side. The list goes on. And on the testing side, I just really would be very enthused to share some of my insight and opportunities. I love to speak to kids too about the exciting opportunities as it relates to not only CAV but automation and technology and AI and all the things that are enabling this. So that's awesome. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. We have one more principle, but before then, are there any further comments on number 8? Okay, Kristen, I think we're on our final principle.
So this was a new principle, everyone, after talking to many stakeholders, including leaders from our Connectivity and Data Committee and people who are really centered in this space. We recognized we had to add one focusing on CAV data, how we make our data systems resilient, and how we protect personal information. So this policy principle is reminding us that as we're looking at these new technologies, we have to design them to be secure, to be safe, to prevent cyber attacks. We have to address how public agencies evaluate the safety data and how they get CAB data, if at all, and how we store it and manage the data governance processes. But this also looks at the liability if something happens to the data. And this is a lot of the work coming out of Damien Reel and Frank Doma's Connectivity and Data Committee. So this reminds us, that we also need to think about, as we're looking at connected vehicle technologies, how do we make sure that they are resilient and safe? And what procedures do we need in place to manage CAB data, which we will have lots of updates in the next year for you based out of the thought leadership in the Connectivity and Data Committee. I'll stop there.
Does anybody want to add to that or have any questions or comments?
This is Damien Reel. One quick add to Kristen's great summary is that, of course, the biggest overarching question is if you don't need it today, don't collect it today because it might be used against you tomorrow. So that's really an overwhelming, overarching thought from the Connectivity Committee.
Thanks, Damien. Okay, any final thoughts from the council? Questions? Okay, we have one in the chat. Just one moment here. From Jim Plummer. I'm new to the group. Do you have any city, urban, and regional planners advising the effort? Thank you.
Well, welcome, Jim, and thank you for being here as a member and representative of the Iron Range. We have been working on occasion with local planning bodies, and Philip Schaffner can give a little bit more information on how we've done that. But a lot of the principal thought leadership came out of our Met Council, our largest MPO in the region. So I want to really thank, to Jim's point, the regional and local planners have been instrumental in making sure that these principles are reflective of the whole values of the state, ICAV and otherwise.
Okay. Any final thoughts from the group before we move into an approval vote of these principles? Okay, I think Kristen, is that everything with the presentation at this point? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for your follow-up questions and comments, and to Kristen for presenting that along with Jay and other members of the ICAV. I think at this time, what the ask is for council members to vote to approve, I believe is the language we're looking for, these guiding principles, and then also recommend to the governor that all state and public agencies adopt and follow these principles. So one is adopting these principles on behalf of the council, and then making the recommendation that state and public agencies also adopt and follow these principles. So the motion now is written in the chat. What it will have you do is, if you're a council member, I believe it'll be easiest actually to record this if you type into the chat. Is that right, Kristen? So we'll have, if you are a council member, please type into the chat if you approve the motion before us, and we'll just open it up for a few minutes. We have a few minutes for this activity.
Ben, did you want to allow for any final comments from the voting members before they vote?
Yeah, we could do that. Overarching. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any final overarching comments or questions or concerns before we continue with this motion? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so I think we can continue on. And again, if you're a council member, please write in the chat if you're able. If you're not able, go ahead and you can give a verbal vote. But I hope that you're all able to use the chat feature on this. and we'll give it another moment or two. Thank you all for everyone who's already voted. We have a number of folks, members of the council who have voted. I'll do a last call. We'll go until 11:02 for final opportunity to vote. Okay, so the voting has closed. Thank you all. It looks like the motion carries. And thank you all for that. There is a follow-up question. Kristen, could you please restate what happens now that this vote has taken place?
Yes, thank you. And I'd love to, as Jay, the chair of ICAV, has really helped guide this as well. So in addition to now making these public and publishing them on the MnDOT CavX website, we are encouraging all of you to take these into your own organizations and use them throughout your programs. We've also made the recommendation to the governor's office and all public agencies to follow these principles. So we will be distributing them in our regular communications channels. But I also wanted to see if, Jay, you've been helping guide this. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that question?
I just wanted to thank everybody, the ICAV team, and everybody else who kind of worked on these guiding principles. It's a lot for this to come together. I think this really sets us forward on the great path for Minnesota. It's much different. Some states are focused on other things. I think ours is probably the most comprehensive approach, where we're really starting to look at balancing safety and equity and innovation. It's not just about innovation or not just about business. It's really that whole comprehensive approach. So I just want to get to those kind of closing comments, Kristen.
And Kristen, if I could just jump into, I want to thank, first of all, you and Tara Olds and your staff for starting to frame these, and then all the work of the ICAV group for fleshing them out as you have, and then the council members too for your thoughtful consideration of these and the feedback you gave. So thanks to this large team effort to get these in place. And it is a living document, as was noted. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for refining these as we go along and as we learn more too. So it'll evolve, but thanks everybody for your work on this.
Well, thank you all for participating in this agenda item, the guiding policy principles for Minnesota CAV. We'll now we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, which is always nice. So what we can do now is we will move into the next agenda item. We have today MnDOT Director of Statewide Planning, Philip Schaffner, who will discuss how the state is working to integrate future mobility in the state's long-range transportation and capital investment plans. So specifically looking at CAV and the Minnesota transportation plans. There will be a presentation, and at the end of the presentation, there will be some breakout sessions where everybody who is a participant today will be put into breakout groups to have a small discussion. There's particular discussion questions we're looking for feedback on, and notes will be taken and recorded and capturing the feedback during those breakout sessions. Without further ado, I will introduce Philip Schaffner, who will also present today. Philip.
Thank you, Ben. And very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. I hope that this will actually be the start of an ongoing conversation with this council about how we plan for and prepare for connected automated vehicles through our long-range planning process in Minnesota. I will do my best to live up to the hype that Kristen White has put on this section of the agenda. So thank you, Kristen, for all of the prompts. I will do my best to cover all the items and looking forward to the discussion here. It's wonderful to be with you. And I'm going to share my screen to get started. All right, so MnDOT is in the process of updating a couple of key plans, and so the timing on this is really appropriate and a really good moment to start having this conversation with the council. As I think many of you are aware, at the Minnesota Department of Transportation, one of our charges is to plan for the state transportation system. And we do that through a series of long-range planning documents. So we sort of call them our family of plans, guided by an overarching vision called Minnesota Go. We have a document called the Statewide Multimodal Transportation Plan. That's an overarching plan for all forms of transportation. That's a 20-year plan. And then we have more specific plans that go into specific forms of transportation like transit, walking, biking, freight, the various forms of freight, aviation, rail, and ports and waterways. We also have a whole lot of other plans too, many of which you may be familiar with. For example, we partner with the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Health on a strategic highway safety plan. We have a transition plan to achieve compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We, as I think you hopefully are all aware, we have a strategic plan specifically for connected and automated vehicles, and I'm going to be talking about some of the work that went into that here in a second. So we do a lot of plans, and we are updating two of these key plans right at the moment that I'll be talking about. One is the statewide multimodal transportation plan, and the second is our 20-year state highway investment plan. And that looks specifically at how we make capital improvements on the approximately 12,000-mile state highway system. That's the interstates, the US, and the Minnesota highways that MnDOT is principally responsible for. That is a multimodal plan too, because it addresses all the users of the state highway system. So both of these are multimodal plans. One is an overarching framework document, and one is very specific to how we invest in state highways. We first actually started talking about connected and automated vehicle technology and transportation technology when we developed our current 50-year vision for transportation in the state called Minnesota Go. We developed this in 2011. Several of you who are on the call today were part of that effort, who were part of the steering committee for this. Back then, Google had started to do some testing of their self-driving vehicles, and we started talking about what this might look like. At the time, I'm not sure how many people really took us seriously back in 2011. It felt a little Jetsons and sci-fi-esque for a lot of people, but we were talking about it and starting to think about it. The vision statement, many people are familiar with the opening statement of the vision, which is that we envision a multimodal transportation system that maximizes the health of people, the environment, and our economy, recognizing that we don't invest in transportation, design transportation for the sake of moving people. We do it for the sake of other broader objectives in terms of our quality of life, in terms of connecting people to the things that matter, to the resources that they need to keep our economy flowing. The vision goes on, and there are discussions related to automated vehicle technology at the time also led to the inclusion of a desire for our system to be flexible and nimble enough to adapt to changes in society, technology, the environment, and the economy. So that's part of our vision, is to have a system that is flexible and nimble, specifically thinking about how the world is likely to change as we look out over the coming decades. Now, we typically do 20-year plans. We also have 4- and 10-year plans. So we have short-term, mid-term, and long-term plans that MnDOT's responsible for. Many of our plans, like plans that the Metropolitan Council and other metropolitan planning organizations develop, are typically about 20-year plans. And when we think about the process that we usually go through, we often try and forecast into the future what the world's likely to look like. And that often works pretty well when we have a fair amount of certainty about what we think the future is likely to be. In particular, our understanding of the sort of the past and trends feels reasonable, and that those are likely to continue and be reliable, and that generally speaking, we're in a period of stability in the world. Well, today, there's not a lot of certainty about the future, particularly when we think about vehicle technology and transportation technology. Our past is probably not a great predictor in some regards for what the future is likely to be like, and we are not in a period of stability on so many different fronts in society here and in transportation. So when we were developing the strategic plan for connected automated vehicles, and as an effort to help prepare and be better prepared for planning for this technology, we deployed a tool called scenario planning. There's a couple different ways that this might look, but it's generally good when we do have a high degree of uncertainty about what the future is likely to look like. We don't have really reliable predictors in terms of trends and past data, and we are in a period of significant change and likely to be in a period of significant change. And the philosophical shift here is really from trying to predict the future to trying to prepare for multiple possible futures at the same time. I think you talked about this a little bit in the agile investment principle, right? Things change, and so we need to be careful about the bets that we make, the investments that we make, thinking about things that are going to work under multiple different scenarios, right? Strategies that are going to make sense for human drivers as well as for machine-driven automated technology, for example. So in 2018 into 2019, we held a series of workshops around the state. I know several of you participated in these, and shout out to Brett with WSB, helped us coordinate and facilitate these conversations. And we we're primarily meeting with local agency staff, so city and county staff, township staff, regional planning staff in our metropolitan planning organizations and regional development commissions and organizations. We targeted and invited some elected officials. There were business representatives, advocates from various different perspectives, as well as freight and logistics companies. So this was a stakeholder-driven sort of stakeholder process to have a conversation. And we wanted to have it for a number of different reasons, one of which was that there was a lot of hype at the time, a lot of different ideas about how quickly this technology was going to arrive, in what form. Did we need to make immediate changes? Did we not need to make immediate changes? At the time, there were a lot of promises, or vehicle manufacturers had sort of made claims that their 2020 model years would be fully automated vehicles. And so we wanted to try and understand the range of different possibilities here and help to provide some level setting on the range of what the future might look like. So we looked at a set of scenarios that the U.S. Department of Transportation had drafted as a starting point for some conversation, and ultimately developed 4 possible versions of what Minnesota might look like in 2040. The idea here was that any of these, in theory, could happen. The future is likely to look slightly different than any of these as well, but they helped provide a range of different futures of what Minnesota might look like as it relates to this kind of technology and related trends about mobility as a service and electrification. And so there's a lot more information about these scenarios than I can really go into today. I'm just going to give you a few highlights about them. The first one was what we called advancing technology. The idea here was that a lot of the sort of technology that we see today really becomes much more common. We see a lot of level 2 and level 3 adoption of vehicle technology, but we don't really get to a widespread use of level 4, level 5, highly automated technology. So we see widespread use of some of the intermediate levels of automation, but not that widespread level 4 automation, except for some very limited deployments. The second scenario basically said we make some progress on automation, but we make a lot of progress on connectivity. And so we get a lot of connectivity on the system between vehicles to each other, vehicles to infrastructure, and we get that intermediate level of automation, but again, not that fully automated system. Scenario 3 we called private automation, and this was where we got a lot of the highly automated vehicles, a little bit less on connectivity, but it was primarily privately owned vehicles or a lot of competing services that weren't interoperable. There wasn't a lot of cooperation or coordination between services, a lot of competing services. And what we see was a lot of congestion in our cities, a lot of sort of confusion, and not a lot of data sharing in this particular scenario. And then scenario 4 was a more of an integrated version with a lot of connectivity, a lot of automation across modes, a lot of integration between modes, a lot of coordination between different modes of transportation, a lot of sort of sharing of vehicles and services that sort of worked in a lot of different contexts. Again, these were sort of possible 2040 futures, not specific predictions that any one of these would happen.